Welcome back, everybody. Jordan Goodfellow here, GigReady. First, before we get started today, just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being awesome. Thanks for being professionals that actually want to grow and learn and get better at what you're doing. If you could, take 5 seconds, 10 seconds right now, hit the like button, subscribe to the GigReady podcast, let people know what we're doing, what we're talking about, because frankly, in the grand scheme of things, if we're not getting better, we're probably getting worse because we're only as good as our last show. So make sure you're listening, make sure you're learning, because this is the GigReady podcast. This is it. Jordan Goodfellow here, GigReady podcast. Joemac standing on the other side of the camera. Joe, how you doing? Thanks for being here today, buddy.
Doing well. Another week in the books.
That's right. We got another week. We got a great week this week. We've got Pete. I always get your last name wrong, dude. Can you just say it for me, please?
Wiejaczka. Pete Wiejaczka.
Thank you. Pete Wiejaczka and Dan Crowe. Both audio engineers, A1s, guys that know how to make it loud, make it sound good. But we're not talking about the live room today. We're talking about virtual. And frankly, the one area that I don't know much about and has really honestly overwhelmed me when I think about like making audio happen, stripping it off of signals, bringing it in, remixing it, making it better to send out to the people that are watching at the other end of the other end of the interwebs. So I'm excited to talk about it. Guys, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we've moved out of the ballroom, at least temporarily. Soon we'll be moving back into hybrid, and we'll talk about a little bit of hybrid. But how has moving out of the ballroom changed the way that audio now has to be executed for events? What has changed? Let's just start with the nuts and bolts of it. Dan, what do you think?
Well, for me, it takes about 80% of what I had been worried about in the past out of the equation. So all the stuff having to do with the rest of the systems, audio in the venue and acoustics and speakers and speaker placement, all that's allows you as an audio guy to concentrate much more on the simple part of getting, or the complex part of getting a signal, and getting it clean and clear and getting it where it needs to go. All of the other things with a show are pretty much the same. Comm becomes incredibly more important. Microphone placement becomes much more important, and you want to keep things stable. Keeping track of loudness, where in a live show you could be loud, it could be quiet. You have to be much more consistent.
Yeah. So
much more attention to detail, but thankfully you've got the space to do that because you're not worried about the 3,000 attendees or 100 attendees. You're worried about the one presenter or the group of presenters, or making sure that the signals coming in from uplink or downlink are all good.
Got it. Okay. Pete, what do you think, buddy? How has it changed?
Well, yeah. I mean, as Dan said, it's similar, but not exactly the same. It's, some of the challenges that we are well established and that we're used to, we don't have to deal with anymore. And so we went from an industry that was very mature and in knowing its challenges to a form of work with very little known snags. And so the audio departments in general have had to really adjust their workflows to accommodate these shows. Look, they're not broadcasts. They're not ballroom corporate shows. They're not a musical event. These are, being produced by mostly producers that have produced live shows with audiences. So they are bringing that live element into a broadcast scenario. So your normal kind of TV mixing workflow doesn't work. Your normal ballroom mixing workflow doesn't work. And so, it's a meld between all of the different workflows of mixing for the types of events, but also the positions. Monitor engineers have generally done pretty well at these shows because it's tons of different mixes going everywhere. And if they're in-ear monitor mixers, they have to be pretty consistent. With intercoms have to be probably the number one thing on these shows that's, besides internet, in terms of importance. And the time to advance the intercoms correctly is probably double a live show, because you can't just walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, give me that button on your pack." And when there's an issue, the TD can't walk over to the projectionist to ask why a projector went, everyone's remote. And so, those communication lines have to be defined, pretty well. And, boundaries have to be put in for people to be able to communicate effectively.
Gosh.
So what are the biggest mistakes that you're seeing companies make with digital virtual audio? Dan, do you want to take that?
Well, I think most of the people that I deal with they're already pretty savvy. The harder thing, it's all more content related. How making presenters comfortable enough to actually not look like they're just looking on a Zoom call, and so what audio can do to help that is try and make the audio part as seamless as possible. But it's really I don't know.
That's okay. And maybe they're maybe they're not making mistakes, and that's what we want. Or maybe it's just that,
Well,
you guys...
I guess I would, to go back a little bit, I think for me, there hasn't been one standard setup. So there's been a high learning curve because things like Unitycom, RTS interfaces have become so much more important, and it's hard to stay up on. And the equipment itself. One of the shows I did was in a small studio, and the audio was done through a Ross Carbonite Ultra switcher, which allows you to control the audio. But I had to do a lot of homework to figure out what I could actually control, talk with video engineers to figure out how it actually worked. But in terms of the overall audio, it's the same. The signal flows remarkably similar. Things like compression and loudness become more important, but all the basics are much the same. I think audio in general is probably more similar to what it was in the past than for any other department.
Huh. So,
Pete, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with Dan. The workflows, if you're mixing a show in a ballroom and you have records, those records are now your main output rather than the PA, or an internet output of some sort. The mistakes I've seen people make, honestly, the two biggest ones are assuming everything's okay. In live, we're able to sort of adjust quickly, and there's a little bit of acceptance when you get into that first technical rehearsal if something's not quite right. And people can run to the rescue and fix it. And also from day to day, the routing's a lot the same, but there's more of it. And so double checking, like for me, double checking my work, I do that all the time. And every time I do it, I find one little thing that in 2 days it might snag me. And there's just so much. And So that's number one. And then just the pre-show kind of lead up and setting expectations and just kind of trying to understand what type of show it is. And then setting those expectations for the presenters or for the clients so that they walk away feeling like they receive the show that was presented to them. That seems to be one of the bigger kind of hurdles, from start to finish.
I just jump in on that and say there's been a lot of shows that I've done where people know exactly what they're doing and what they want. And there's been some really people that aren't in our business are trying to do shows that they're not, none of this is something that they're comfortable with or know how actually works. So the pre-production and actually finding out what they want to do, like, do you want to interact with this person? Do you want to see slides? The client has to rethink what they're doing. And the sooner we're involved in that, so we can figure out how many microphones, what kind of, how stuff's going to be backed up, how is it going to become inbound, how is it going to go outbound. So there's a lot more pre-production involved, and a steeper learning curve as equipment varies from project to project.
Yeah. Is there, I mean, of course there's a lot more IP based equipment, Dante, lots of Readle panels, we're talking about Unity Com. Are you still using a lot of or any of the connectivity that you were before from a copper standpoint, or is it just network cables everywhere, buy 2,000 feet of network cable before every show, re-terminate it all, plug it all in, make sure it works, check those connections, and everything's digital now, or not digital, but everything is IP based completely?
I think it depends on the project. A couple of them have been really, really standard. And a couple of them have been all over Dante till they're outbound. And like the Ross Carbonite switcher, there's no audio connection at all, really, because it's all coming in HDMI.
Yeah.
So both the audio and video are coming in. There are no time sync problems because it's coming in all as a HDMI signal. So it's been different every time, but I would say there's not a standard in any way.
Yes,
so
the Wild
West.
Person,
you have to know a little IP. You have to be ready for what's going to show up.
How do you?
Pete, you brought up a great point. It really is the Wild West when it comes to producing events. I felt like there's been no right or wrong answer. Everybody's come up with their own solutions to very unique problems. Tell us more about how that ability to not have any rules has helped you or hindered you.
Well, I think it's probably the same for Pete as it is for I. By the time we're involved, there's a fair amount of stress and pressure already. So they're expecting that we just handle whatever the Wild West part of it is. We're going to make it work. And, I think you can see that by looking at anything that any content you're looking at on the web these days. It goes from really bad, a guy with a guitar making a few bucks through donations on a website to really high-end production. But it is all the Wild West. There's no one mixer that seems to be better than others. No one video switching system. There are a lot of proprietary systems out there as opposed to your standard Zoom.
Yeah.
So it's just you got to be ready.
Yeah, and back to the mistakes part of it, one of the actually the largest, most detrimental mistakes that various people make in the hierarchy chain or have made in the past is assuming that the show is the same, or assuming that, oh, it's the show that happens every quarter and it's all exactly the same way. Well, yeah, it was exactly the same way when we did it in person, but like all the ones that I've been involved with that have been the same show, every single show has been different in one way or the other. Either more remote presenters, less remote presenters, internet storms that day, not internet storms that day. The set changes, the camera angles change, the way that we transport signals is different. And so you can't, one of the unsettling things for people that are accustomed to live shows is we can't settle into a comfortable position doing these jobs because the variables on every single one of them, even if it's the same client and same show, they change, and you just have to be on your toes all the time. And most live operators are used to, especially audio mixers, are used to feeding off the audience. So the audience is digging this song, maybe I'll boost it a little bit, or that keynote speech was really powerful, so that walkout songs were going to need to be a strong one or whatever. And you're in that room with the audience, feeding off of them, your energy's feeding off them. Being in a control room in some far, far away place, not all live guys are used to that, being disconnected. So it takes a different set of personality skills to stay focused.
It's harder to feel the vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, a lot of my friends say, oh, that should be such an easy show. It's just, it's just one microphone and a presenter. And that's usually the hardest shows because there's nothing to hide behind. There's no music, there's no audience sound, there's no, if there's a problem with S's or P's or a hit on a wireless, it's just, you're naked. So it has to be pristine.
No parachute to get you out of trouble.
Yeah.
No applause to cover that late mic pickup. You have to be, that's part of the workflow thing. You have to be in sync with the director. And I mean, that's with TV broadcast too. But, if he switches or they switch to something and you don't have that audio up, it's your problem and you just made a mistake. So, yeah.
I've removed the word easy from my vocabulary in the last 3 years because I used to say that. And just like you said, Dan, as soon as the word easy came out of my mouth, the entire show went to crap. And it was like falling down the stairs 4 flights. So I've turned to the word straightforward now. When someone asks me, how is it? It's a very straightforward show. 4 presenters and it's in a ballroom and that is it. But the word easy does not come out of my mouth anymore. That's kind of like my knock on wood, I guess. Has this leveled the playing field with certain pieces of gear when it comes to like the CL5 let's say this. So Yamaha CL series, before they came out with the Rivage, whatever the heck it is, I don't know. That was like the standard. I mean, every single RFP I ever got, CL5, 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 because that's what the engineers wanted. But with the Soundcrafts and even the Allen and Heaths and the Avids and the Digicos, and I mean, has this kind of leveled that playing field a little bit where people aren't as picky for what console they want because of the sound or because of how it functions, or is it still exactly the same? I need my desk this way because that is, what I need.
I think budgets are way different. So where in the past I would definitely get to call out the console I wanted. I'm much more, it's what the client has in their studio, in their facility, in their system. But it's, I think with the advent of digital consoles, it's a very level playing field. There good results can come from all of them, and it's all having the basic audio skills to know gain, compression, limiting. It's just much more razor focused.
It's way more about the operator now than the actual manufacturer of the gear, I think.
Got it.
Yeah, it's a pretty level playing field out there.
Because the
for
Dugan
audio.
can't cover up your mistakes. Is that the kind of or
No, it's there's certain consoles that are like industry standard broadcast consoles that just don't have the feature set to do these types of shows.
Yeah.
They just they're great consoles, but they can't get you what you need. And so some of the lower end consoles actually do have those features, or most of the Yamaha consoles. And so there's that the shows are less pretentious. There's less room for pretentiousness in these types of shows because of budgets, like Dan said, or that's what's already in the studio and you're just walking in and using it. And a lot
physical
of
space.
Yeah. And physical space. Oh, and what is the protocol that you're interfacing with? A lot of the really popular broadcast consoles don't have a way to do Dante, or they do, but it requires 2 other pieces of equipment or whatever. And the other aspect of it, there's been a lot of non-audio equipment owners that either own a studio or a video equipment or media servers, and they've had to buy audio equipment to do their version of their studio. And guess what? They're probably not buying the Studer or the Kelrec. They're probably not even getting the Yamaha, although if they're smart, they would. They're probably getting like a D-Live or something that's cheaper, but has all the feature set there to accomplish close to what those others can.
But I want my SSL, Pete. I need my SSL.
It's a very good console.
So with the digital consoles all leveling the playing field, is there a way to bulletproof that virtual audio chain? Is there a way to make it a standard of sorts?
No, I don't think so. Because it's the same as lighting consoles or as video switchers. It all depends on the production company, the client, the budget. That's all constantly shifting.
But with a lighting console, I'm just outputting DMX, and that never really changes. It might be digital DMX versus analog DMX, but at the end of the day, a lighting console does the exact same thing no matter how you package it.
Right, pretty much a good digital console is much the same. You can have digital or analog output, and that's really the only change. But the feature set and noise stays pretty much the same. But I can't tell you how much just space is. A bunch of these, because of COVID protocols, there's still departments, but everybody's on a table, separated, and physical space has been a huge. So like a big Yamaha console, a big Soundcraft, a big Digico, aren't appropriate, mainly because of physical space. A lot of time because these shows are happening, you're not in a ballroom for a week. You're showing up at 6 a.m. and doing some comm checks and going through stuff and going live at 10, or doing rehearsals and coming back. The time frame, everything's much more compressed, so the room for error is less. And there's no, I saw when you guys talk about bulletproofing, there's no way to bulletproof any of it. You can just have the best gear, the best equipment you possibly can, and go through it, and go through your part of it and understand your part of it as best you can. But if there's a way to bulletproof it, we'd be very wealthy.
Well, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity there that hasn't been addressed, or somebody hasn't invented that mousetrap yet.
Well, the thing that Dan was getting at is that unlike a lighting console, a LD can design a show, hand it to an ME, and that ME or an assistant LD can execute that show almost exactly like the previs. Audio guys and audio design, and even in the virtual broadcast world, is so specific to the person, but also the workflow of what you need to do to accomplish those signals and those routings for that show. And because it's the Wild West, it's not like a TV broadcast where you have one program output. I mean, you have as many outputs as you have presenters sometimes. I mean, I've done some above 30. And so that workflow is very different than if I have 5 presenters. And, Dan and I may completely set up our consoles completely different based around the same show and accomplish the exact same outcome. And so the standardization in terms of the workflow on the console is not even close to your standard like TV truck, walk in and start throwing up faders. And it's dependent on the facility. So everyone's approached it slightly different. Some people do IFBs, some people don't. Some people are doing laptops, some people are doing vmixes. Like all of that matters to Dan and I and how we set up our consoles. And then what console is it? Is it a CL5? Okay, what are the limitations if I have 20 mix minuses I have to come up with in a 24 mix console? That is a very different workflow than if I have 12 mixes and I have 12 more available to do other things. So, every single job is designed around the functionality of, and this is why it's important. Like, I'm more of a consultant now than an audio guy, because 90% of the success of the show comes in consulting the client and understanding what they're after creatively or by necessity, and then executing an audio plan or a holistically larger picture studio plan, because now all the signals are married together, most of them. So, it's more of that broadcast truck mentality of embedded SDI signals, HDMI with embedded audio, video and audio signals over the internet that have to ship together so they arrive in time together. Now Dan and I have to rely not just on our Dante technician or our patch master with the 56 channel snake. We have to rely on some sort of EIC person or IT style person who is handling those embedders and handling those de-embedders. And, audio guys treat their signaling with lots of care, way more care than almost all the other departments. And because a signaling mistake usually ends up as a very loud mistake or a very silent mistake, but either way, it's not good. And in some instances, we can get fired over it if that microphone signal goes to the wrong place at the wrong time. That is not a pretty scene. So we are very protective of that.
So it's interesting you mentioned mixes and DSP on a console. I mean, that follows a lot in line with video, where it's like when people call me and ask me about an E2 and the capacity and how many pixels and how much outputs and, can I do, if I cross over cards, what happens and what do I lose in resources and how do I mean, so there's a lot more planning than you can't just throw a CL5 at a show and say, oh yeah, it'll be fine. Like, I've got my, my fold back, I've got my downfill, I've got my front fill, I've got my outfill, I've got my main PA, and then I got 2 monitor mixes, and you're like, oh, I got room for days. So now you're looking at mix minuses. How much DSP do I actually have? Am I maxing those things out? That's a totally different, I hadn't even considered that idea within, because I'm always thinking, oh, it's console, just throw send the CL5, it'll be fine. So if they are, we're working through all of this stuff, DSP, have you ever run out of DSP and had to be like, oh, I need a sidecar console or stuff like that now with all the mix minuses and everything else that you're running?
Not doing broadcast or virtual shows, but definitely in rock shows.
Okay.
Because you use lots and lots of plugins, and you can max out a console pretty easily on some of the larger rock shows. but in terms of mix minuses and even 64 channels of Dugan, that's easy to do without needing a sidecar. Now, 5 years ago, I was doing shows where I wanted a lot of channels of Dugan mixing, and it was only possible to get, I think, 30 on a Yamaha or 32. So if I had more mics, I had to do a sidecar. But even that's changing as consoles become more efficient at DSP, and manufacturers become more comfortable with plugins.
Slightly unrelated question, real quick. Why are audio consoles built in groups of 8?
I have no idea.
I just thought it like 8, 16, 32,
Yeah.
64 for the or 56.
I'm sure it has to do with manufacturing of circuit boards and slots.
Okay.
I don't because there are some consoles now you can build strip by strip, like 500 series. So they don't have to be 8 anymore. But that's an interesting question.
Right. Yeah, but analog consoles
think,
were 8. Analog consoles were 8 as well, and I think that's
yeah.
So like most analog consoles have 8 groups.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Lighting's in 10s. So we
Digicos are in 10s or
metric.
12.
You guys are imperial. So
yeah.
Maybe that's it.
Couldn't be in 10s. Cannot have as much as a lighting guy. We need to be. I mean, it's like why audio guys don't count to 3. Then they don't have to lift.
Jordan, back to your last question for a second. Besides sometimes maxing out potentially on DSP or mixes or whatever, the more successful facilities that I've seen design the video, usually it's the video switcher, because that's maybe the piece that's centralized, or the audio console. But if those are in sync, then it's easier to expand that capability, because you're like, okay, this video switcher can do so many inputs and so many outputs. This audio console can do so many inputs and outputs. And if they're generally close, then you don't run into a problem where like the video switcher can do 48, video ins and video returns, but the audio console can only do 20. So keeping those in sync is kind of important. And then the other thing, other than DSP, is actual person DSP. Running out of mixing, I've done a fair amount of shows where I've had to have a second A1 and then pick a console that I can have a second console connected to it, controlling the same mine. And because there's enough analog mixing that has to be done in terms of like actual fingers moving things, one person can't do them all, or maybe more than, I don't know for you, Dan. For me, I can listen to about 3 things at the same time, including so 4 things if you include comm. After that, it gets a little weird. And so, if it's like 2 laptop returns, program out, and something else, and then comm, like that's starting to like max the person out, the operator. And so, you have to apply that like 80% rule and say, okay, this particular job or workflow or whatever may need a second mixer, and may need an intercom technician, and may need a network technician to work with the intercom technician. And because it's all together now,
Huh.
Okay, so go ahead, Dan.
Oh, well, you were asking what one of the biggest mistakes there are. And I think for audio, it's not having a preview monitor. In the past, audio guy, we see what's live, what's going on. That's what we mix to. And it's critical now to see who's in the other offsites, and if they're ready to go live. So I think the biggest mistake has been when a vendor hasn't provided a preview, so I can see all the different sites, and because you're not mixing, you're mixing the space. So if you don't have an idea of who's adjusting the mic, you can't leave everything open.
And you can't see them watching on stage like you used to.
Exactly. So that's I think for audio, that's been the biggest mistake I've seen, is people that aren't providing the audio department with the proper video monitoring.
Yeah. And that's going to be important for, I mean, going forward completely. Really, truly, everybody is going to need multi-views now. So if you're doing a multi-site hybrid, you're going to need to have not just what's going on at that moment, but if you're getting ready for the next, let's say you've got a hub and spoke where you've got 5 locations that are all linked together. You need to see what's going on at all 5 of those locations, because if you're ready to go live to number 3, you're standing by. Well, you don't want to wait till they switch to the guy to hope that it's there. You want to be able to see at least like the output preview that may not be on screen in that room, but is coming from the other place. And then you at least have the heads up. You're thinking, okay, now I know we're ready. I've got that line coming in, instead of, all right, I sure hope they did their job right, running the fader up to nominal and then hoping that as soon as they take it live, it's there.
And the same thing goes the other way. I mean, some of the EICs, interface technicians, outbound, like some of them need PFL consoles or a way to scroll through their sources to hear that, there is actually audio on that input, so it definitely goes both ways.
Huh. Good call.
So as a lighting guy, I always am curious about the visuals, and I want to make sure that those are good. For you, give us your top 3 best practices for presenters who are doing virtual presentations from home. What are those things that they need to make it sound good and to give you everything you need on your end?
Well, I think there's really only, I think the biggest single thing, and it's not an audio thing at all, it's a viewer preference and a viewer engagement, and that is where the eye line is. I've noticed between doing a bunch of these, depending on the director and their knowledge of how to get a good eye line, makes all the difference. It makes you feel engaged or not. And I think if a presenter is feeling engaged and can see that they look engaged, they present better, stronger. Other than that, obviously you don't want anybody speaking in a noisy space or a big echoey space, and you want them to observe good microphone etiquette and good microphone technique. But for me, I see so many music videos, so many corporate presentations, so many Zoom calls where the eye line's wrong. And that little difference is it kind of transcends audio, video, everything. It changes it from looking to an amateurish production to, oh wow, this looks awesome. And it's amazing, because I've, in the course of doing these, really has changed how I will be looking at doing audio when we go back to live. Just because you now understand that where teleprompters are is really been wrong for a lot of live shows, because it's creating the eye line that's wrong, and not a lot of people get it. So it's not an audio thing, but it's kind of my pet peeve.
So yeah, teleprompters are going to have to go in the back of the room. Like, we're going to be doing 86s and 90-inch monitors back sitting by cameras now. Good point.
100%.
Yeah.
You were going to say, Pete?
No, I absolutely with Dan. I mean, we were talking about how important lighting is with these webcams too. And so, but the way they look is important. The way the presenters look is important, but people tend to tolerate the way, bad visuals more than bad audio. Like if the audio is bad, probably they're going to sign off or mute it or something. So, those 3 things are very important: audio, framing the shot with eye line, and the lighting. But, the audio, is I got to put it slightly above everything. but yeah, exactly. People go to listen to the keynote, not watch it. But no, the three things: wired internet, number one, absolutely thing, wired internet. And along with that, tech checks a couple days in advance at the actual location. And if the internet's bad, then backup internet, deploy backup internet. And then after that, quiet room, as Dan said. And then, this goes with the tech check day, but, tech checks with the platform, day of the show, if possible,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many tech checks day before the show, 2 days before the show, morning of, something's completely different with the connection with, this is, let's be clear, this is specific to remote presenters, usually at their home, maybe at their office.
Got it.
When I was watching the Grammys the other day, and I was shocked at how many times they went to somebody accepting, their award, and the audio was like the torture droid from Return of the Jedi. I mean, he was just like,
I suspect that there was probably a different problems in the internet. But
yeah, it was pretty painful to watch, and I can't imagine being in your guys' shoes, having to watch that. How do you deal with that, and how do you work to make it better on your show so that doesn't happen?
It's all about testing and just really, I've done some shows with some pretty high-end platforms or systems or whatever. An example of that might be like Claire VLA, and they have to be stress test. The clients have to have stand-ins, and the exact number of stand-ins that you have on show day, using the platform or using the system, because all of these things are CPU, reliant, and they're all computers. So it's, the amount of CPU used for 4 people dialing in versus 1 is different. And that affects the way, if we're using Dante, chances are it's DVS, which is software that's relying on the CPU. So the computer sciences part of these virtual shows have, people who understand that have been a little more helpful in, the bigger picture of having an event going well. Because in that case, like the Grammys, maybe something wasn't stress test or load tested in terms of like the CPU and the system, and you just never know. So that would be my answer.
And the client understanding what it takes to have the pipelines work at maximum bandwidth. There's different levels of Zoom, and you pay for better quality, for better bandwidth, and it goes with the proprietary systems, with your internet connection, with having an IT guy on site, is become critical. I mean, it just syncing faster than anything.
And that's a positive coming out of this is, Jordan, you saw in some of the stuff before COVID, I started doing this on really large events, but, coming out of COVID, it's no longer an argument. There will be an IT guy, and either they'll be shared between audio and video, or if it's a big enough show, each department will have their own.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's no way going forward where that's not going to happen. Like that will happen. They might be doing double duty. They might be the PA tech, they might fly some PA and then go do networking, but and depending on the size of the show, like I said. And so the A2s that can do RF, throw a couple mics on somebody, and potentially, for your medium to small size show, those guys are going to get a lot of work because those expertises are going to be needed going into these venues and, dialing in remote, as we do these like weird hybrids.
Yeah. So then glad you brought up positioning within virtual, hybrid, all of that. What are a couple of best practices or I guess concepts that engineers should be looking at now going forward as we are? Because it's not going away. I mean, we've seen already that there are procurement people that, especially in the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, they're like, holy mackerel, we saved $1 million by not sending everybody to Bora Bora to do our, whatever event that was. We love that. That's perfect for the bottom line. We're staying virtual. What do they need to be looking at, practicing, reading up on, knowing now so that they can deliver better virtual shows?
Communication. They need to know and figure out how they're going to communicate. I can't tell you how many shows there's been a director in New York, talent's in San Francisco, talent does their stuff. Then they take their notes from a Zoom that they bring up for the presenter to read. And that's got to change. And I think companies across the board are figuring out that's a really bad way to be directing, to be trying to get a good product out there. And I think across the board, even corporate wise, intercom is critical to because we are so remote. It's become the most important thing, other than all the different elements working. For everybody to be able to communicate in close to real time is critical. So I think a lot of the like AV department at Cisco or Apple or HP, they're discovering that painfully as they go along, and I think that's going to change. I'd like to have stock in Clearcom and RTS and Riedel right now.
What about you, Pete? What are some
Yeah,
things?
intercom, and us as sound designers, need to help, I think, consult our clients to, like lighting guys, with the angle of the front lights, intercoms, like, let's talk about how we're going to communicate on the show. Is there an internet broadcast portion of it? Is there not? Is there, Dan, it's similar to like multiple ballroom shows where we've all done those. And even though the ballrooms are across the hall, they want to talk to each other, only now they're over the internet. So, but double checking your work is a huge one. Like I said, with these shows, things change so much. So keeping organized, live doc paperwork, patch sheets, signal flow diagrams, because, you might be, that one video channel, has to be tracked by audio, someone from video, and usually an IT person of some sort. And if there's two sites, they're doubled up. So that's 6 people at minimum that all need to know that camera 1 is on SDI 1 and SDI 1 is carrying audio channels 1 through 4 or whatever. So all of that needs to be in a centralized location that everybody can look at. So paperwork. And then because of the multiple sites, trusting the team that you're working with, either hiring people that you trust, or if you don't know somebody, getting the time leading up to the event to get to know them, and then to define, if it's the first time you're working with somebody, to define exactly what that workflow is going to look like. And, that's signaling, that's everything. Are you going to give me post fader direct outputs? Are you going to give me pre fader? Are you going to give me a backup mix? Is that what protocol transmission is that backup mix on? So, those sort of things now, 2A1s who before very much were mixing 2 different shows are pretty much need to be exactly in sync, mixing the same show now. And so, all of that, and this goes back to pre-production, like we talked about a little while ago. I mean, this is all about, the pre-pro and the planning. And you plan not because that's what you're going to end up doing, but you plan so that when the changes come down the pike, exactly where to go with those changes, because like these shows always change during load in. There's always something being added or whatever.
It's such a different world. You know, maybe 5 years ago, you'd hand some stuff off to video. Hey, here's my 2 record feeds. Here's your monitor feed. Here, I'll take the playback feeds. Very little contact between the departments, and I think that's going to be a real plus going forward. I talk more with EICs, and if we're not on the same page going into it, then there's problems. So pre-production, and I think this has brought some really cool stuff out. This whole COVID having to do stuff virtually has brought some real skills forward, and made departments work closer than they ever have, which for a variety of reasons we haven't done in the past or haven't done it very well, and now it's essential. It's critical. I
100% agree on the comm. It's always been a bugaboo on any show. If your comm doesn't work, the show doesn't work. You end up failing 9 times out of 10 if your comm is not working right. And I'm really interested to see more about how systems like Unity, that virtual comm, and how they progress moving forward, because I think that's going to make things like loading in a rock show, for instance, way different. Rather than screaming into a pendant on your shoulder, being able to just talk like I'm doing right now, and talk to your team and only have them dialed into your system, is really a unique thing that I think I'm excited about moving forward. Since we discussed all that, what are the things that we don't know for our future of doing audio and in the virtual and hybrid world?
It's a tough one. I think the thing we don't know is you were talking about standardization earlier, and I think someone is going to figure out a platform that is really compelling that makes virtual work. I know PRG, Claire Brothers, a bunch of people have come close to figuring out how to make interaction and the actual presentation compelling, but it's still basically a glorified webcast or Zoom call. And I think what we don't know is who's going to figure the piece of that puzzle out and what that's going to mean. But no, I don't think anybody's figured it out yet. So that's what I don't know. And I can't wait, because I would like to see really compelling broadcast and online content.
Does that mean breaking it out of? Are we talking VR, AR?
I'm not. I think that may be parts of it. I don't know, but I know it. When somebody figures out what that compelling piece is, it will be a standard pretty fast.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people, trying to figure it out. I just don't think we're anywhere near there. We're in the very early stages of figuring this out.
And it's so hard because that compelling piece is getting together face to face.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Having drinks at the bar, shaking hands, hugging. Like when we get on show site, what's the first thing you do? You go around and shake hands and hug all your friends.
Can't wait.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's Dan, you're right. Like that's the biggest piece that's missing, is that getting together. And I don't know that any of the screen solutions can really replace that. Like avatars, it's not right. I don't know.
But we talked about this actually in our hybrid podcast last week. There's some compelling arguments for VR and VR goggles with Apple. They're diving in head first. Facebook is doing the same. I think something is going to come out of that we're going to have to deal with on the back end in the future for an event, whether it's a Facebook event, whether it's an Apple event, whether it's, something where you're going to a general session live or virtually, and they just set up, different cameras around the room that you can pick your one that that's going to be your seat for the show, or going to a concert even. I think there's a lot of innovation that hasn't even been touched in this COVID world, and I'm excited actually for the potential, if it's done right.
Joe, back to your question, because I didn't answer it.
Okay.
I'm looking at
Sorry.
I wrote something down when you asked it. No, I feel like this is really important. I'm really passionate about this. What your question was, what are the things you don't know that we don't know? Well,
right.
In order to not know it, in order to know that you didn't know it, you have to research. You have to look into it deeper. So like if, we've all learned a lot in this past year, we've all learned new stuff. And, for me, the things that are new that I've learned, I tested it over and over and over again. I played around it. I asked, stop asking questions. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? It's kind of like the RF, when I used to do RF coordinating work, what's the worst case scenario? Cup the antenna and walk it around the room. Well, with some of these platforms and some of these internet things, sometimes they're changing firmware once a week or once a month. You might not do a show until they've changed firmware. So like assuming that things are going to be the same thing that they were 2 weeks ago. Nope. Probably they're not. So test.
Great point.
Try to break it. Try to break it before it breaks in front of people. I don't know. Unplugging.
Unless it's a Microsoft computer and it updates unintentionally while it's sitting there.
Case in point.
Gosh, I've been on Microsoft shows when Microsoft laptops that are backups and live on screen go into update mode even when it's shut off. It's insane. You walk out to the VP that's on stage. He's like, "Why is there a blue screen?" I'm like, "Dude, it did it, and it just happened, and there's nothing we can do about it because everything's connected." So,
and that can cause a snowball because someone who overthinks that problem might say, "Well, I need to install a widget to stop updates." But the reality is you have to know your tools, and our tools have changed. They're computers now. You don't, to prevent that, you don't have to install a widget. I've seen those widgets break more PCs than they've helped, because they stop other softwares from working as intended. And so, like it goes back to that computer sciences kind of piece of it. Lighting, I think, has probably been doing networking in a live event industries more than any other department, then probably video a little bit, but audio, we've been doing networking for quite a while. And, there's things like, if there's a turntable on stage, that EMI that might interrupt the comm signal or might make noise come out of that one speaker because there's a digital signal going to it. Those are all learning experiences that we've learned over the course of 25, 30 years or whatever. And we've had to learn that same quantity of stuff in a matter of days sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's how the year's been.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, lots of learning. I know that, it feels like every day I walk out of the office and my brain is like, it's just weary from like all of the new things, the decisions that you have to make to like, what am I going to learn today? What do I have to absorb, grab onto, hold on to, figure out that is beyond my, like, in the world of live events, the way it was 12 months ago, it's like, okay, here we go. Lights, sound, video. Maybe we add in a little bit of scenic. We got a little bit of special effects, but it all pretty much functions the same. I pile a bunch of gear in a semi. I go to the gig. We unload it. We set it up. We do a show. We go home.
Trim heights and point locations.
Yeah.
like basically the only variables.
Yeah. And And now it's like, okay, well, how did we connect to these people? Because today it's Chicago, tomorrow it's San Francisco, the next day after that it's Portland, or they're all coming today. We've got Seattle and LA and like all of these different parts. And then now hybrid, which we're going to add into this after or as we grow, which is already really taking hold. Multiple locations, delayed broadcasts, one point to many, multiple locations all linked together in real time, getting the same signal. It really is just going to complicate it. For the sake of time, as we're coming up on an hour here, I wanted to kind of wrap up with what are two things that I could do to have a better audio experience at my next virtual gig, the next one that I do. What are two things that I should be doing, just as call me a video guy if you want. What should I be doing from an audio standpoint that is going to make my event better the next time?
Continue to work and refine pre-production. That's making sure everybody knows what's expected, where stuff's coming from, and the signal flow, and what the backups are. What's going to happen if this call doesn't go through? Knowing, usually we test backups on shows, and now it's because the sources are so much more important and so much we have less control of. It requires more preparation, more making sure that the bandwidth, the provider, just pre-production has become, it's hard to say it's become more essential because it's always been essential, but now it's critical. And I think that's the biggest thing. And knowing, and maybe making sure that you're on board with presenters, knowing what's expected of them and helping them figure out how they can bring life into whatever you're doing.
Got it.
Yeah, for me, I would say rehearsals probably with the exact gear you're going to use. And, there's so many variables with like presenter computers, whatever. Take the internet out of the picture, but, hiring stand-ins to connect to all those computers on your rehearsal day. So many places they don't do rehearsals, or they don't do a rehearsal day, and it's the facility. It worked last week, so it's going to work this week. It might, but it also might not. And if you have different, oftentimes you might have different operators, and so that rehearsal is as much for the operators or the show caller or the producer as it is the equipment and the workflow of, how that particular show is going to go. And the same team might do two different shows, and that workflow and who follows who might be completely turned on its head depending on, the creative direction and what's actually desired out of it. And then the willingness to say, the consulting role, there's a nice way to say something's not going to work. I mean, I've had to say it over headset, that thing we wanted to try, I'm listening to it now. It's not going to work. We could talk about why later, but we actually shouldn't do that thing. So being able to pivot, with the client. And, Dan said, that goes back to the communication of, Jordan, what are you, and if you don't know, I've seen so many people think they know audio, even audio guys sometimes, and they fall on their face because they haven't thought it through, or they haven't talked it through with another person. I guess talking it through with another person is pretty,
yeah,
important.
Just bouncing it off. And that's finding out the thing you don't know that you don't know as you talk through something is
Exactly.
You won't miss things, and other people do. And finding a little bit of humility to understand that you don't know everything and I don't know everything. but that together we know way more than either of us will ever know in a lifetime, frankly. I would say that the humility through the whole thing is going to have to be a huge point that, yes, we won't talk about it per se, but it's very important. I have to understand that I don't know it all, which is why I'm asking these questions. I'm saying, holy crap. When I think of audio, when it comes to the virtual side of things, my brain just starts to melt. And it really does, because there's so much more complication. It's not like a Zoom where I can just dial in and we just talk and whatever. But to me, like you said earlier, Pete, the audio is so critical to how people receive what they see. That's why broadcast sounds good, sounds the way that it does, is because audio is important. Joe?
Yeah, and you see what you hear. If you're watching a band and the mandolin isn't that loud in the mix, and you look at the mandolin, or the director cuts to the mandolin, you will hear the mandolin even if the mixer did not turn it up, because you want to hear what you see and you want to see what you hear.
Yeah. That's very true. No, that's a very, very good point. Joe, final word. What are your thoughts, dude?
I go back to Dan's takeaway on communication. I think coming out of this, we as event professionals are going to communicate better because of this experience, because audio now needs to talk to video a little bit more when we're doing a hybrid version. Lighting is definitely going to have to talk to video more because of 4-camera. And I think the overall positive out of all this is going to be that the communication between departments is going to go up exponentially as we roll into live/hybrid events.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we'll keep communicating. And guys, thanks so much. I know we went a little over today, but really great discussion, learning a ton. The main theme, communication, talking to each other, telling each other exactly what we need, how we need it, and how we can accomplish the tasks that we have at hand. So we'll keep talking. We'll keep doing things. And Pete, Dan, thanks for coming on. Really appreciated it. Your guys' knowledge, really truly is fantastic. You guys know what you're doing. We love having professionals here that are great at what they do. So thank you so much. And Joe, as always, great questions. Thanks for jumping in, asking them, and keeping us on our toes. So guys, we thank you so much. Joe, next week, let's do lighting. I think it's a great topic to discuss, and we'll have a lot of great things to go through. So next week, we'll talk lighting for virtual events, and then Pete and Dan can listen in and get better at making things look good.
Let's hug it out, guys. Hug it out.
All right. Thanks, guys. Hey, have a great day. Much. And we'll talk to you next time.
Okay. Take care.
See you.
Thanks,
see ya.
Bye.
Wow. What a great day today. Can you believe that we can actually get better at what we do every single day? I love it. I'm so happy and so proud of the professionals and the group of people that I get to work with, just like the two guys that you heard today. Listen, we'd love it if you go share with your friends, tell them about GigReady, let them know how we can help them become better professionals, as well as make you a better operator each and every day. Have a great one. We'll see you next time.